Welcome back to Big Mouth, and fancy seeing you here, and I hope you're enjoying my Aquaman coverage. So I've just said I wasn't going to do any more Aquaman videos today, but James Wan has quote tweeted an ILM visual effects Twitter account, right, where they talk about what went into doing the hair CGI, the hair VFX for the film. Now this is interesting because about a week ago, Screen Rant actually criticised that very effect. So this is what James Wan says when he's quote tweeting the actual tweet from ILM. This is a great little insight into one VFX component, of which there were many. The damn hair, Momoa's long hair and beard was such a pain to get right, but ultimately it became an important visual cue to help sell the underwater look. And this is what ILM say. Your read on a character is so influenced by how their hair looks. ILM VFX supervisor Jeff White on why it was crucial to get the CG hair right in Creepy Puppet's Aquaman movie. Read more. So should we click? Right, let's click on this and give it a read. In Aquaman, underwater CG hair was surprisingly one of the toughest effects. Aquaman is the latest film in Warner Bros. DC Extended Universe. It's a massive visual effects film. There are entirely synthetic underwater cities, countless CG sea creatures and characters, an enormous final act battle, and several huge out-of-water action scenes. Those effects, overseen by production visual effects supervisor Kelvin McQuain and visual effects producer Kimberly Nelson Bacajo, were difficult enough in their own right, but one other kind of effect that might at first be considered somewhat secondary CG, underwater hair, remained one of the hardest things to pull off in the film. Visual effects supervisor Jeff Wright from ILM, a primary VFX vendor on the film, tells Cartoon Brew what made underwater hair so tricky but also so crucial in selling the world of Aquaman. I'll let you into a little secret. I've told you this before. I'm actually a writer, a director and an actor, and I've just started studying VFX. So this is really fascinating to me. ILM's work on Aquaman spans several sequences, many of which take place in the elaborate underwater worlds. It's here where key characters played by live actors converse, fight or otherwise interact. These actors were filmed dry for wet, which means basically they weren't in the water when they were filmed, meaning they were captured on set in dry environments that would be made to look underwater in post-production. If the characters were riding sea creatures, sometimes they were also filmed on tuning fork rigs that allowed for the right kind of forks, underwater flow and movement. That movement was also achieved by replacing actor hair and clothing with digitally simulated versions, with the aim of conceiving audiences that the action was taking place deep below the sea. For ILM, my God, this throat. For ILM alone, this turned out to be an enormous process amongst their 670 shots for the film. In total, the VFX studio would produce more than 400 hair simulations across those shots. The process started with reference of hair underwater. Luckily, White was able to source some very close to home. I happen to have 8-year-old twin girls. One has very long hair and one has more shoulder-length hair, so I spent a lot of time shooting reference. What we realised right away was our tools were really built largely around the animal hair, where you have lots of guide curves, but you can get away with a lot of interpolation between those guide curves because they generally move. I hope you like this technical talk. If you don't, I'm sorry. Together with patches. Instead, ILM needed to simulate many kind of different hairstyles underwater and deal with all the ways hair, whether it's be flowing, short or even beard hair, can be influenced by vortices within the water. You can get a lot of strands growing their own direction, but you also get a lot of hair that kind of stays clumped together when it moves around, said White. All of that was taken into account in terms of the tools that we were building out for doing underwater hair simulation. On top of that, said White, it is never just push the button and you run real physics and then it looks good. You can very easily get to not very flattering hair poses and looks when you just run the simulation. Even though it looks like it's underwater, it doesn't look good for the character. And we, of course, wanted to keep them heroic. Furthermore, director James Wan had a very clear notion of how the underwater hair should look, says White. One notion was that the hair always needs to be reacting to body movement and to be lifting up and parting or separating on top of the character's head as they move back and up. Lots of volume, observes White, was something ILM added, matching several comic book images that illustrated hair in this way, especially for the characters Arthur, Jason Momoa and Mira Amber Heard. To aid in underwater hair simulations, ILM utilised and upgraded its haircraft tools, which were originally developed for the work the studio had done to the feature film version of Warcraft. Underwater hair definitely required some new tools for us in terms of getting much finer control over the way that the hair clumps together, which sticks together, and what flows free, and then being able to run hair aims multiple passes, explained White. We'd lay down a base simulation to get the right overall shape, but then when we go in and pick out strands of hair to have it separate from the main mass. Before simulations actually took place, ILM artists meticulously moved the live-action actors, sometimes tracking markers fixed to their real hair were used on set, but other facial details or even crowns worn on set also worked accurately enough as tracking geometry. Making sure that their hairline stayed locked was super important, said White, because the integration of the hairline was a really tricky component of making the hair work. Separate CG water simulation were then coupled with the hair sims. This involved running digital replicas of the characters through a water volume and allowing the vortexes, or whatever that word says, of the water simulation to affect the hair simulation. Doing this gave good results, but still needed fine-tuning to allow for tufting dynamically through the shot down the length of the hair. A lot of times we get it looking pretty good up on top of their heads, and as used get towards the end, it wouldn't be splayed quite right, said White. Occasionally, it just wasn't head hair that needed to be simulated. Momoa's Arthur also sports a prominent beard, and that too was occasionally fully CG, or moved via warping and combined separate layers of composing. Interestingly, a major challenge with the underwater hair simulations came about in terms of VFX reviews. Usually, a director will bite off an animation review and the shot then moves down the line, but in the case of shots requiring CG hair, one often reviewed hair sims directly. Your read on a character is so influenced by how their hair looks. This is what I read to you before. Whether they look cool, or in some cases they can actually look very dorky if their hair is sticking straight out the sides or has a big puffy heel on top of their head, noted White. One of the key ways of getting approvals was to get it 90% of the way there, and then we'd have post-sim sculpting tools that could use to finish out the shapes or take care of stray hairs that weren't looking too good. Hair actually plays a pretty big role in the film, added White. There are some very dramatic moments in the third act battle where James described to us this crescendo of music and the character's hair just flying up and all around them. That was really quite a challenge for the artist to get, but it looks fantastic. And I think that's it. Well, you know what? I hope you weren't too bored watching me reading that, because I thought that was really interesting. And do you know why I think this is really interesting? Because last week, as I've said before, Screen Rant criticised the CGI hair. Now, I want to be clear to you, this journalist knows nothing about VFX. I know very little about VFX, but as I said, I started studying it for a project I'm going to do, which I can't go into right now. So reading about this is very interesting, because I thought it was actually Weta who was doing the VFX for Aquaman and not ILM. So that's pretty interesting. Or maybe they did it together. I'm not too sure. But it looks like predominantly ILM did the shots, most of the shots for Aquaman. I mean, there's no better VFX company than ILM, and even they had to build new machinery for the CGI hair. For me personally, the CGI hair isn't even an issue. It is beautiful. This painstaking process that they went through to get it looking so perfect. And you see it as such a pointless element. But without that, people would have criticised them. And for me, the CGI hair, the VFX on this film is flawless. And listening to some people criticising it is a waste of my oxygen.